Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What started as a light morning debate on The View quickly spiraled into one of the most talked-about clashes of the year. The topic was simple. Should adult children be legally required to provide for their parents in old age? But what followed was anything but. Steve Harvey, appearing as a guest to promote a family values campaign, took the question personally. "If your mama fed you when she was hungry herself," he said, leaning forward, "you don't need a law to tell you to give back. You need a conscience." The crowd erupted in applause. Joy Behar smirked, crossing her arms. "So you want the government to guilt-trip grown adults into being good kids? That's not family, Steve. That's control." Her tone was playful, but her words struck deep. From there, the temperature on set rose fast. Steve's calm smile faded as Joy doubled down, challenging the idea of forced responsibility. Within minutes, their friendly banter turned into a fiery, emotional standoff that had the entire audience glued to their seats. By the end of that segment, Joy would lose her cool entirely and walk off the set mid-broadcast. The internet would explode, and millions would be asking, did Steve Harvey just say what every parent secretly feels?
The show began like any other lively morning on The View. The hosts were laughing, the audience buzzing, and Joy Behar, ever the ringleader, looked particularly sharp. She introduced the day's guests with her usual playful flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, you know him, you love him. Comedian, host, and man who somehow makes every family argument sound funny, please welcome Steve Harvey." The audience clapped and cheered as Steve walked out in a crisp gray suit and that unmistakable smile. He gave a wave, hugged a few of the hosts, and settled into a seat. "All right now, Joy," he said with a grin. "I know you brought me here to start trouble. Let's get to it." Joy chuckled. "Trouble? No, Steve, just a conversation, the kind you like." The topic flashed on screen. Should adult children be legally required to provide for parents in old age? The studio quieted a little. It was one of those questions that hit home for everyone watching, especially for older viewers who'd spent their lives raising families. Joy leaned forward. "Now, Steve, I know you've been pretty vocal about family responsibility, but should it really be the law? Should we make kids pay for their parents no matter what?" Steve didn't hesitate. "Joy, I'll tell you what I think," he began. "When you've got parents who gave you everything they had, time, money, health, love, you don't need a law. But the sad truth is, too many folks these days do need one because we've raised a generation that values convenience over care." A few audience members nodded and clapped. Sonny Hostin jumped in, trying to mediate. "But Steve, what about kids who can't afford it? Life's expensive. You can't expect everyone to shoulder that." Steve nodded. "And I'm not saying everyone should go broke, but I'm saying don't forget who fed you when you couldn't feed yourself. If a parent spent their last dollar on you, the least you can do is make sure they're not eating alone in some rundown place in their old age." Joy raised her eyebrows. "That's a nice sentiment, Steve, but laws aren't built on sentiment. You're talking about guilt, not government." Steve leaned in, his tone firmer now. "No, I'm talking about morals, Joy. The problem is we've replaced morals with loopholes." The audience reacted, some cheering, others murmuring. Whoopi jumped in, trying to mediate. Okay. So Joy says love should be free. Steve says love should be responsible. Somewhere between the two of you, I think we might find sanity." But Steve wasn't done. "Joy, if you saw a mother who raised 5 kids and now she's sitting alone, eating from a can, wouldn't you feel something?" Joy's voice sharpened. "Of course I would, but you can't build laws on emotion. People have complicated families. Some parents weren't good. Some don't deserve that loyalty." The crowd reacted again, some applauding Joy's point, others booing lightly. Steve sighed. "And that's the problem, Joy. We're looking for excuses. You can't fix a society that keeps walking away from its elders." The tone shifted again, less banter, more conviction. The camera caught Steve's eyes, steady, serious, a man speaking from somewhere deep. Joy leaned forward, her hand on the table. "You're talking like the whole generation forgot what love means. Maybe people are just tired of being told they're bad kids if they don't do things your way. Steve replied quietly. Maybe they're just tired of being reminded of what they should already know. The audience fell silent. For a moment, there was no laughter, no music, just two strong personalities staring across the table, one driven by principle, the other by pragmatism. Whoopi exhaled loudly. Well, y'all weren't kidding when you said this topic would get spicy. Steve chuckled, breaking the silence. Spicy? Girl, this is real life, and it's gonna get hotter before we cool off. The crowd laughed again, easing the tension for just a second, but everyone could feel it. The spark had already been struck. Joy forced a smile. Oh, I have no doubt. You've got that preacher fire in you, Steve. Let's just hope it doesn't burn down the set. He grinned. As long as truth is the flame, I'll take the heat. The live audience erupted, and Joy gave a small, nervous laugh. The energy in the room had changed. This wasn't going to be another friendly debate. It was the start of a collision, of ideals, of generations, of two worldviews that couldn't coexist peacefully. By the next commercial break, producers would be whispering in Joy's earpiece to keep it light. But it was already too late. Because the sparks weren't just on stage, they were about to set the whole conversation on fire.
When the show returned from break, the air in the studio felt different. The chatter and laughter from earlier had quieted into a tense hum. The crew was ready, cameras fixed on Joy Behar and Steve Harvey, both sitting a little straighter now, each prepared to make their case. Joy smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. All right, we're back. And Steve here thinks we should all be signing checks to our parents once we turn 30. Let's dig into that. Steve chuckled lightly. That's not what I said, Joy. But if that's what it takes to wake folks up, then maybe I should have. Laughter rippled through the audience, but Joy didn't flinch. You're talking about putting something deeply personal, family care, into the hands of the government. That's not just unrealistic, it's intrusive. Steve turned toward her. See, that's the thing, Joy. The moment someone says the word law, people think it means losing freedom. But I'm not saying Uncle Sam should babysit your wallet. I'm saying if you can afford to take care of your parents, you should. And if you won't, then maybe it's time to ask why. Sonny Hostin stepped in, sensing the heat. But Steve, you know that can't be one size fits all. Some families are broken. Some parents didn't show up for their kids. Should the law treat them the same? Steve nodded slowly. No, it shouldn't. But most families aren't broken. They're disconnected. There's a difference. The disconnection comes from comfort, not trauma. We got too busy chasing stuff that don't matter, and we left the people who raised us behind. Whoopi gave a soft of agreement, while Joy shook her head. Steve, you keep talking about disconnection like it's some moral failure. Life changes. Kids move away. People have their own families. It's not selfish, it's survival. Steve leaned back, crossing his arms. You call it survival. I call it selfish when someone's mama can't afford her medicine, but that same person is posting vacation photos in Paris. The audience reacted with a loud ooh. Joy pointed a finger at him, half smiling. You're generalizing. You can't guilt-trip people into taking care of others. Not everyone's life looks like yours, Steve. Not everyone is lucky enough to have the means. He raised his eyebrows. Luck has nothing to do with love, Joy. You don't need a mansion to visit your parents. You don't need millions to sit and have dinner with your mama. You just need a heart that ain't gone cold. The applause was immediate. Joy looked visibly irritated. Okay, so what's next? Should we start rating people based on how often they call home? I'm serious, Steve. This idea of forcing adult children to take responsibility ignores real struggles. He shot back, and ignoring responsibility created those struggles. You can't build strong kids when they never saw a strong family. Joy frowned. That's easy to say when you're not the one balancing rent, debt, and 2 jobs. A lot of people can barely afford their own lives, let alone someone else's. He looked at her steadily. Then we've built the wrong kind of world, Joy. Because if the price of success is forgetting your parents, then that's too high a cost. The studio went quiet again. The tension wasn't just between them, it was in the audience, too. You could see people shifting in their seats, some nodding with Steve, others whispering to their friends, siding with Joy. Ana Navarro tried to cut the tension with humor.
Can we all just agree to send a thank you card to our parents tonight and call it even? A few chuckles broke the silence, but the argument was too strong to fade. Joy leaned in again, voice sharper. You're making it sound like people who don't take in their parents are heartless. That's not fair. What about parents who were absent, who caused pain? You can't legislate compassion. Steve's expression softened for a moment. You're right. You can't. But you can remind people what compassion looks like. My mama worked 2 jobs. She didn't have no help. When she got old, she didn't need to ask. We showed up. Not because a law said so, but because love did. The applause was immediate, and Steve's voice cracked slightly when he finished. Joy waited until it died down, then spoke, calm but pointed. And that's beautiful, Steve, but that's your story. Not everyone has a mama like yours. Some have complicated pasts. You can't take a universal hammer to something as personal as family. Steve met her gaze. You're right again, is personal. But that's exactly why it matters, because when we stop making it personal, we start letting systems replace souls. The line hit hard. Whoopi leaned back and said quietly, That's deep, man. But Joy wasn't ready to concede. She adjusted her glasses and went on. You talk about systems replacing souls, but the law you're suggesting is a system. You want the same thing you're warning against. Steve's tone cooled, but his eyes stayed sharp. Difference is, my system's built on responsibility, not avoidance. Yours lets people look away. Joy exhaled sharply, a mix of frustration and disbelief. You can't fix morality through legislation, Steve. You just can't. People have to want to do the right thing. Steve countered immediately. Then why do we have laws against theft, against neglect? Because some folks don't want to do right until there's a consequence. That's human nature. The room buzzed with murmurs. It was the kind of back and forth that could go on for hours. Sonny looked at the camera and half joked, We might need a referee for this one. But Steve wasn't laughing anymore. His voice dropped low, almost somber. You know what scares me, Joy? Not that people won't help their parents, is that we're starting to justify not doing it. Joy leaned back, visibly caught off guard by the shift in tone. You're assuming people are selfish. Maybe they're just trying to survive in a world that doesn't care about families anymore. He replied quietly, Then maybe that world needs fixing. There it was again, that deep, grounded conviction that seemed to silence the room every time he spoke it. Joy looked down, fiddling with her notes. You make it sound simple, Steve, but it's not. Life isn't black and white. You can't legislate kindness. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time we start teaching it again. The studio was hushed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even Joy, who rarely backed off a fight, sat thoughtful. Whoopi finally said, Well, this might be one of those conversations we're going to be feeling all week. And she was right, because this wasn't just an argument about money or law. It was about something deeper, the soul of family itself.
For a moment, the studio sat in silence. The argument had worn the smiles off everyone's faces. Even the audience, usually loud and reactive, seemed unsure how to respond. That's when Steve Harvey leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the table. His tone changed. It wasn't about debate anymore. It was personal. You know what this reminds me of, he said, voice steady but quiet. When my daddy got sick, I was still doing stand-up, barely making rent. He couldn't walk without help. I remember him sitting on the porch, telling me not to worry about him, said I had to chase the dream. But every night I went back to that house and helped him to bed, because dreams don't mean a damn thing if you forget who gave them to you. The audience was silent, eyes fixed on him. Whoopi nodded slowly, while Sonny's face softened. Joy crossed her arms. That's touching, Steve, really, but not everybody had a father like yours. Some people spent their childhoods cleaning up their parents' messes. You can't expect them to just forget all that and play caretaker out of guilt. Steve looked at her for a long moment, eyes heavy. And I hear that, Joy, I do. But even then, forgiveness is a kind of freedom, too. You hold on to pain, it poisons both sides. I'm not talking about rewarding bad parents. I'm talking about ending cycles of neglect with love instead of law. Joy sighed, shaking her head.
You talk about love like it's magic, Steve, but some wounds don't heal just because you decide they should. Sometimes walking away is the only healthy choice. Steve frowned. Healthy for who? 'Cause I met folks who walked away and spent the rest of their lives trying to fill that empty space. The words hit hard. There were murmurs in the audience, some clapping softly, others shifting uncomfortably. Joy's expression hardened. You're romanticizing sacrifice. Not everyone's built for that. You think love fixes everything, but that's not reality. Some people don't deserve that kind of devotion. That's when Steve's voice dropped, low and raw. And who decides that, Joy? Who decides when a parent stops deserving care? The kid? The courts? God? Joy stared at him, mouth tightening. You know what I think? I think sometimes God would understand walking away from someone who hurt you. You talk like love has to mean suffering. It doesn't. The tension thickened. Steve's expression softened, but his voice carried a quiet power. Maybe, but I've seen too many people waiting for apologies that never come, waiting for peace that could have started if they just picked up the phone. The camera cut to the audience, faces serious, some emotional. A woman in the front row wiped a tear. Joy leaned forward, her tone sharp again. So what, you'd force someone who's been through hell to pay their parents' bills, to relive the worst parts of their life just to make society feel better about family? Steve paused. I'm saying we've built a world that's forgotten what family even means. We call it progress when everyone's alone. There was a ripple of applause. Joy looked frustrated now. You can't legislate morality, Steve. You can't make people good through laws. All that does is punish people who've already suffered enough. Steve nodded slowly. Maybe not, but laws set the standard, Joy. You might not be able to force love, but you can remind people of what responsibility looks like. And sometimes that's the first step back home. The room was quiet again. Whoopi gave a small nod, saying, There's truth in both sides here. But Joy wasn't done. You keep saying responsibility, but what you mean is obligation. You're talking about turning guilt into government policy. That's not compassion, that's control. Steve looked at her for a long moment. And maybe you've never had to watch someone die alone, Joy. Maybe you've never walked into a nursing home and seen old folks staring at the door waiting for a child that never comes. That's not control, that's tragedy. The words hung in the air. Even Joy looked momentarily speechless. Steve's voice softened again, trembling just a little. We're talking about old souls who gave everything they had, now being treated like burdens. If it takes a law to remind people they matter, maybe that's not the government's failure, maybe that's ours. The audience broke into applause, long and loud. Joy glanced down, visibly emotional, but holding her composure. Steve, I don't disagree with compassion. I disagree with coercion. There's a line between teaching values and legislating them. Steve leaned back, nodding. And maybe that's the difference between how you see love and how I do. To me, love is law, not written on paper, but written in how we treat the ones who raised us. The applause grew again, a mix of admiration and awe. Joy exhaled deeply, realizing she'd been drawn into something deeper than a debate. The look between them wasn't anger anymore. It was understanding through exhaustion. Still, everyone in the room could feel it. The next words could break whatever fragile peace had formed. Whoopi sensed it too, and tried to steer the conversation forward, but it was too late. The line between debate and confrontation had already been crossed. And when they came back from the next commercial break, that final break, the one where everything would collapse, was waiting.
When the show returned from its final break, Joy Behar was visibly tense. She sat stiffly, glancing at her notes but not really reading them. The audience sensed it too. The air was heavy. Steve Harvey, on the other hand, looked calm. He leaned back, hands clasped, like a man who'd already said what he came to say. Joy broke the silence first. "All right, we're back," she said, her tone clipped. "Before the break, Steve here told us that love should be law. I think most people at home are wondering, where does that end? Are we going to start policing who's a good child now?" Steve looked at her calmly. "Joy,
Nobody's talking about policing. We're talking about principle. We've got laws for everything, traffic, taxes, business, but not for the one thing that defines us, family. Joy scoffed. Oh, please, family doesn't need laws. You can't turn affection into a government form. Steve's voice sharpened. Then why are so many old folks dying alone, Joy? If love's enough, how come it's not showing up? The studio went still. Whoopi tried to interject. Let's remember, this is a sensitive topic. But Joy cut her off. No, Whoopi, I'm fine. I just don't appreciate being told that if someone doesn't take in their 80-year-old mother, they're some kind of monster. Steve shook his head. That's not what I said. I said too many people find excuses not to care. Big difference. Joy leaned forward, eyes flashing. You're judging people you don't know. Some of them spent their childhoods being the parent. You have no right to tell them they owe anything. Steve's tone stayed measured, but his words carried force. I've lived a long time, Joy. I've met folks who had it hard, real hard, and still found room to love. It's not about owing. It's about honor. Joy snapped back. Honor doesn't pay the bills, Steve. You can sit there in your nice suit and preach, but some of us live in reality. The audience gasped. Steve leaned forward, his voice low but piercing. And in that reality, we've forgotten what gratitude looks like. Joy rolled her eyes and muttered, Ugh, here we go again. Yeah, Steve said, pointing lightly toward her. Here we go again. Another generation talking about rights and forgetting about roots. The comment landed hard. Joy's jaw tightened. Excuse me? Steve replied evenly. I'm calling this mindset selfish. Yeah, the idea that it's okay to walk away when it gets hard. That was it. Joy's face went red. You don't know me, Steve. You don't know what people live through. You sit there acting like everyone's got a perfect little family like your sitcoms, but life isn't that neat. The crowd stirred. Whoopi's eyes widened as Joy's voice grew sharper, more emotional. Steve stayed calm but firm. You're proving my point, Joy. We get defensive when someone holds up a mirror. Family's not neat, it's not easy, but it's still sacred. Joy slammed her hand on the table, startling everyone. You don't get to tell me what's sacred. The audience gasped again. Steve blinked, caught between disbelief and sadness. Whoopi tried to jump in. Hey, let's cool down here. But Joy was already standing. You think guilt makes people good, Steve? It doesn't. It just makes them miserable. Steve stood too, voice still controlled but strong. And comfort makes them cold. You can't build a good world on comfort alone. The tension was unbearable now. You could feel it in every inch of the room. Joy stared at him for a beat, breathing hard, then shook her head. You know what, she said, pulling off her mic, I'm done. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured about love like I'm the villain. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, applause, all at once. Joy turned to the crew, waved them off, and walked straight off the set. Cameras caught her retreating down the hallway before cutting back to a stunned Whoopi and a silent Steve Harvey. For a few seconds, no one said a word. Steve exhaled and sat down slowly. That right there, he said softly, almost to himself, is exactly what we've lost, the ability to talk without running away. The audience gave a hesitant, emotional applause. Whoopi finally looked at the camera and said, Well, we didn't plan for that, but maybe that's the conversation we needed.
The studio was still buzzing when the credits should have been rolling. Steve Harvey sat forward, elbows on his knees, as if trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. Joy Behar had left the stage in frustration, muttering something about outdated values, but Steve's words lingered in the air long after she was gone. The audience wasn't clapping. They were silent, absorbing, processing. That rare, heavy quiet that only happens when someone says something that hits too close to home. Steve looked at George Stephanopoulos, then at the remaining panelists. You know what's wild? He said softly. We talk about laws, about what kids owe their parents, but nobody talks about what we owe each other as a family before it even gets to that point. George nodded slowly. You think it's a moral issue more than a legal one? Exactly, Steve said. You can't legislate love. You can't write a bill that makes someone pick up the phone and check on their mama. That comes from how you were raised. And if we keep pretending that independence means isolation, then yeah, people are going to grow old alone. Someone from the audience spoke up, an older woman, her voice trembling. "You're right," she said. "My son lives 3 states away. He sends money, but I trade every dollar for one dinner together." That broke something in the room. Others nodded, some even teared up. Steve turned to the cameras. "And that's what I'm talking about," he said. "This isn't about forcing your kids to take care of you. It's about teaching them that taking care of you is a privilege, that you matter." For a moment, the show didn't feel like a debate. It felt like a sermon, or maybe just a conversation the whole country had been avoiding. George cleared his throat, his voice softer now. "So, if you could tell younger people one thing, what would it be?" Steve thought for a long moment. "I'd say this: money fades, fame fades, but the people who raised you, they don't stay around forever. When they're gone, you'll wish you'd given them your time, not just your excuses." The camera cut to the audience, faces heavy with thought. Backstage, producers whispered nervously, wondering how to end a show that had gone so far off script. But the viewers at home were glued to their screens. Social media was already lighting up. "Steve Harvey just made the View cry," one user posted. "He said what we've all been thinking." When the segment finally wrapped, Steve stood and thanked the audience. No applause sign was needed this time. People rose to their feet on their own. It wasn't about agreeing with him. It was about respecting what he said. As he walked off stage, George caught up to him. "You know," George said, "Joy might not have liked what you said, but you made a lot of folks think tonight." Steve gave a small smile. "I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here to tell the truth." And that truth echoed across living rooms that morning, that family responsibility isn't about laws. It's about love, duty, and the kind of legacy that can't be bought or written into legislation. Outside the studio, a small group of audience members waited to thank him. One older man shook his hand and said, "You reminded me to call my daughter tonight." Steve just nodded. "That's all I wanted, brother. Just one call." If you like this powerful moment, make sure to subscribe for more emotional debates, celebrity showdowns, and unforgettable talk show clashes. Drop a comment below. Should adult children be legally responsible for caring for their parents, or should it come from the heart?